Dr. Elena Martinez's hands were inside the boy's chest cavity, manually compressing his dying heart, when Director Carson Blackwell's voice cut through the emergency room like a blade. "You're finished here, Martinez. Security will escort you out immediately." Her fingers never stopped their rhythm. 30 compressions, breathe, repeat. The 16-year-old's blood pooled on the sterile floor. "He's a child," she whispered, feeling the flutter of life beneath her palms. "Get your hands out of that patient and leave this hospital now, or I'll have you arrested for assault." If hospital injustice makes your blood boil, you're not alone. Hit subscribe and stay until the end to see what happens when the truth comes out. And comment below with your city so I can see how far this story reaches. The surgical gloves were slick with blood, but Elena's hands remained steady. She'd done this before, though nobody in Mercy General Hospital knew where or when. The teenager's name was Marcus Williams, and he'd been wheeled in 17 minutes ago with a gunshot wound to the chest. 17 minutes that had felt like 17 hours. "Dr. Martinez, did you hear me?" Blackwell stepped closer to the operating table, his 6'2" frame casting a shadow over the makeshift surgical field. "I said, remove your hands from that patient." The attending nurse, Patricia Chen, looked between them with wide eyes. She'd worked at Mercy General for 23 years and had never seen anyone challenge Blackwell's authority. The man was a legend in hospital administration, a cost-cutting specialist who'd turned 3 failing hospitals into profitable enterprises. He was also, Patricia had learned, a man who valued protocol above everything else. "His heart stopped 4 minutes ago," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying the controlled calm of someone who'd made life-and-death decisions in circumstances these people couldn't imagine. The trauma team was debating whether to open his chest or wait for the cardiothoracic surgeon. We didn't have time to wait. "You don't have the authority to make that decision," Blackwell snapped. "Dr. Morrison is the chief of surgery, and he's on his way from the golf course. You should have waited for proper authorization." Elena's eyes never left the boy's chest. "Dr. Morrison is 45 minutes away. Marcus Williams would have been dead in 8. A young resident named Kevin Park watched from the corner, his tablet recording the confrontation. He'd been shadowing Dr. Martinez for 3 weeks and had noticed things about her that didn't quite add up. The way she moved in emergencies, too fast, too precise, too confident. The terminology she sometimes used that sounded more military than civilian. The scars on her forearms that looked like burn marks from something catastrophic. "How did you know to do this?" Kevin had asked her once, watching her perform a thoracotomy on a car accident victim. "Textbooks," she'd answered. "Lots of studying." But Kevin had read every trauma surgery textbook in the medical library, and none of them taught you to work with this kind of speed and certainty. "Patricia," Elena said now, her fingers adjusting their position around the boy's heart. "I need you to push another round of epinephrine, and someone check his pupils. I want to make sure we're not missing a head injury." "Dr. Martinez," Blackwell started. "His pupils are reactive," Patricia interrupted, moving to follow Elena's instructions. She'd made a decision in that moment, one that would probably cost her job too. But she'd seen enough in her career to recognize genuine medical expertise when she witnessed it. The heart beneath Elena's hands suddenly contracted on its own. Once. Twice. A rhythm establishing itself. "We've got sinus rhythm," Kevin announced from the monitors, his voice cracking with excitement. Heart rate 42, 45, 51. "Good," Elena said softly. "Marcus, if you can hear me, you're going to be okay. We've got you." The boy's eyes fluttered open briefly, confused and terrified, before closing again. But he was breathing. He was alive. Elena carefully withdrew her hands from his chest cavity, and Patricia immediately moved in to begin the closing procedure. The emergency room, which had been chaos 17 minutes ago, was now settling into the controlled activity of post-crisis stabilization. That's when Blackwell made his move. Security. Remove Dr. Martinez from this hospital immediately. She is terminated effective this moment for gross violation of medical protocols, unauthorized surgery, and endangering a patient's life through reckless disregard for proper procedure. 2 security guards appeared at the emergency room entrance, both looking distinctly uncomfortable with their assignment. Everyone in the hospital knew Dr. Martinez. She was the quiet physician who worked double shifts, who never complained, who had a success rate in the ER that bordered on miraculous. "Sir," Patricia began, "she just saved that boy's life." "She gambled with that boy's life," Blackwell corrected sharply. "Medicine isn't about heroics, Nurse Chen. It's about following established protocols that protect patients and protect this institution from liability. Dr. Martinez has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that I've been documenting for months. This is simply the most egregious example." Elena removed her surgical gloves slowly, her face expressionless. She'd known this confrontation was coming eventually. Blackwell had been watching her since her first week at Mercy General, questioning her methods, criticizing her speed in emergency situations. She'd tried to slow down, to blend in, to be just another attending physician working her way through the healthcare system. But some instincts couldn't be suppressed. When someone was dying in front of you, protocol took a back seat to saving their life. "Dr. Martinez," Blackwell continued, his voice carrying across the emergency room for maximum effect, "you are a dangerous liability to this hospital. Your cowboy medicine might have worked wherever you came from, but it has no place in a modern medical institution. I want you out of this building in 15 minutes. Kevin Park stepped forward, his young face flushed with anger. "Dr. Blackwell, with all due respect, Dr. Martinez just performed a procedure that saved a teenager's life. Doesn't that count for something?" "Dr. Park," Blackwell's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet, "if you value your residency position at this hospital, I suggest you return to your duties and let the adults handle administrative decisions." The threat was clear and effective. Kevin stepped back, but his jaw was clenched with frustration. Elena walked toward the locker room without a word, the security guards trailing behind her like she was a criminal. The hallway seemed longer than usual, every step echoing with the weight of another career ending, another identity that hadn't worked out. In the locker room, she changed out of her surgical scrubs in silence. The security guards waited outside, giving her privacy but making their presence known. She looked at herself in the mirror. 52 years old, gray streaks in her dark hair that she'd stopped dyeing 2 years ago, lines around her eyes from too many sleepless nights in places she couldn't talk about. "Who are you today, Elena?" she thought. Dr. Martinez, the fired emergency room physician? Or Commander Martinez, the ghost who died 6 years ago? Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "The Williams family wants to thank you. Marcus is stable. You saved him." Elena deleted the message and powered off her phone. Gratitude was dangerous. It created connections, and connections created questions she couldn't answer. She gathered her few personal items, a coffee mug, a framed photo of a sunset over water that nobody knew was taken from the deck of a submarine, a worn medical textbook that looked civilian but contained handwritten notes from classified training most doctors never received. When she emerged from the locker room, the hallway had filled with staff members, nurses, residents, orderlies, people she'd worked with for the past 3 years. They stood in silence, a quiet protest against what was happening. "Dr. Martinez," a senior nurse named Helen Morrison said, her voice thick with emotion. "We all know what you did in there was right. We all know you saved that boy." "It doesn't matter what's right," Elena said quietly. "It matters what's protocol." She walked through the corridor of supporters, feeling their sympathy and confusion. They saw a dedicated physician being fired for doing her job too well. They didn't see the 15 years of classified service, the nuclear submarine reactor meltdown she'd contained while performing surgery on 3 crew members, the 73 lives she'd saved on a mission that officially never happened. They didn't see the woman who'd been erased from military records to protect secrets that could destabilize international relations. The hospital's main entrance opened to a parking lot bathed in late afternoon sunlight. Elena's Honda Civic sat in its usual spot, 13 years old and showing every mile. She'd bought it used when she'd reinvented herself as a civilian, choosing anonymity over the privileges her military rank could have provided. She was halfway to her car when the sound reached her, a deep, rhythmic thumping that every nerve in her body recognized instantly. Helicopter rotors. Elena's hand went instinctively to her hip, where a weapon would have been holstered 15 years ago. Old habits, old reflexes. She forced herself to breathe normally, to not scan the sky with tactical awareness, to not assess wind speed and approach vectors. But the sound was getting louder, closer, and distinctly military in character. Behind her, the hospital's main doors burst open. Blackwell emerged, his face red with fury at yet another disruption to his carefully controlled environment. Staff members pressed against windows, phones coming out to record whatever was about to happen. The Navy CH-53E Super Stallion appeared over the hospital's east wing, its massive frame unmistakable, even to civilians. This wasn't a medical evacuation helicopter. This was a heavy-lift transport used for military operations. "What the hell is this?" Blackwell demanded of nobody in particular. "Did someone call for military assistance? We have protocols for this." The helicopter descended toward the hospital's rooftop helipad with practiced precision. Elena stood frozen in the parking lot, her mind racing through possibilities. This couldn't be for her. She'd been careful. She'd changed everything, her appearance, her name from Elena Rodriguez to Elena Martinez, her entire history. She'd been dead for 6 years, officially, permanently dead. The helicopter touched down, its rotors still spinning at operational speed. The side door slid open, and a figure in Navy dress uniform emerged, moving with the purposeful urgency of someone on a time-critical mission. Commander Sarah Chen. Elena recognized her instantly, though they'd never served together directly. Chen was the Navy's top crisis response coordinator, someone who only appeared when situations had escalated beyond normal channels. Chen spoke briefly with the helicopter crew, then strode toward the roof access door with the bearing of an officer who expected immediate compliance. She disappeared into the building. 60 seconds later, she emerged from the hospital's main entrance, scanning the parking lot with tactical efficiency until her eyes locked on Elena. "Dr. Elena Martinez?" Chen called out, covering the distance between them in rapid strides. Elena's mind went blank for a moment. They'd found her. After 6 years of silence, of hiding, of building a new life, they'd found her. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen, United States Navy," the officer said, though her uniform made that obvious. "I need to speak with you immediately about a medical emergency requiring your specific expertise." Blackwell had followed Chen out of the building, his administrative instincts overwhelming his common sense. "Commander, I don't know what this is about, but Dr. Martinez is no longer employed by this hospital. She was terminated less than 30 minutes ago for serious violations of medical protocol." Chen's gaze shifted to Blackwell with the cold assessment of someone trained to identify threats. "Terminated for what, specifically?" "She performed unauthorized surgery, violated multiple hospital policies, and endangered a patient's life with reckless—" "Did the patient survive?" Chen interrupted. The question hung in the air. Blackwell's face reddened further. "That's not the point. The point is, did the patient survive?" Chen repeated, her voice carrying military authority that made Blackwell's administrative powers seem trivial. Yes, but then it sounds like Dr. Martinez did exactly what she was trained to do. Chen turned back to Elena. Ma'am, I need you to come with me immediately. We have a critical situation on a naval vessel that requires medical expertise beyond what our standard personnel can provide. Elena found her voice. Commander, I think there's been a mistake. I'm just an emergency room physician. I don't have any specialized naval medical training. Chen pulled out a secure tablet and consulted information that Elena couldn't see. Ma'am, my intelligence indicates otherwise. We have a medical emergency involving radiation exposure and severe trauma on a classified vessel. The patient has specifically requested you, and frankly, you're the only person within 200 miles who has the qualifications we need. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Radiation exposure. Classified vessel. Specific request. This wasn't a random military emergency. This was about her past. About the submarine service that officially never existed. About skills that supposedly died with her old identity. Who requested me? Elena asked quietly. Chen's expression revealed nothing. That information will be provided during transport, but I need your decision now, Dr. Martinez. We have a pilot down at sea with approximately 90 minutes to live. Blackwell stepped between them again, his need to control the situation overwhelming his judgment. Commander Chen, absolutely not. Dr. Martinez is not representing this hospital in any capacity. Her termination stands, and I will not have this institution's reputation further damaged by her reckless— Then she won't be representing your hospital. Chen cut him off with finality. She'll be consulting directly with the United States Navy under emergency authorization. Dr. Martinez, will you help us? Elena looked around at the faces watching from the hospital windows. Patricia Chen, who'd backed her play in the operating room. Kevin Park, whose medical education had just been interrupted by institutional politics. Helen Morrison, who'd organized that hallway of silent supporters. And Director Carson Blackwell, whose rigid adherence to protocol had just destroyed another person's career without a second thought. Who's the patient? Elena asked Chen directly. Admiral James Kovac, Chen said, and Elena's world tilted on its axis. He was very specific that if anything ever happened to him in a naval emergency, we were to find you. He said you'd understand why. Kovac. The man who'd commanded her submarine during the reactor crisis. The officer who'd ordered her to let 3 men die to save the reactor, and who'd watched her disobey that order and save everyone anyway. The admiral who'd helped stage her death to protect her from the political fallout. The man who'd promised she'd never have to return to that world. What happened to him? Elena's voice was barely audible. Submarine emergency. Radiation exposure during a containment breach, plus severe internal trauma. Our medical officer says it's beyond his capabilities. The admiral said you'd know what to do. Elena closed her eyes. Kovac wouldn't have broken his promise unless he was dying. And if he was dying, it meant something catastrophic had happened to the submarine program they'd given everything to protect. How long do I have to decide? You don't, Chen said bluntly. The helicopter is running. We lift off in 3 minutes with or without you. But without you, the admiral dies, and probably several other crew members who are depending on his survival. The weight of the decision pressed down on Elena like the ocean at depth. She could walk away, maintain her cover, continue her quiet civilian life. Or she could step back into the world that had nearly destroyed her, back into the classified shadows where people like her existed only in redacted documents. Dr. Martinez, Blackwell's voice was sharp with warning. If you leave with this military officer, you're abandoning any chance of contesting your termination. There will be legal consequences. I will personally ensure— Sir, Elena said, turning to face him fully for the first time. I resign my position at Mercy General Hospital, effective immediately. She looked at Chen. Commander, I'll need access to my full military medical credentials, the ones that officially don't exist anymore. Chen's expression shifted to something that might have been respect. Already arranged, ma'am. Everything you need will be on the helicopter. As they moved toward the hospital entrance to access the roof, Patricia Chen called out from the doorway. Dr. Martinez, what should we tell Marcus Williams when he wakes up? He'll want to know who saved him. Elena paused, looking back at the hospital that had been her refuge for 3 years. Tell him it was a team effort. Tell him to stay in school. Tell him his life matters. Then she followed Commander Chen into the building, toward the helicopter, toward the past she'd tried to escape, and toward whatever emergency had been catastrophic enough to make Admiral Kovac break his promise and bring her back from the dead. Behind them, Carson Blackwell stood in the parking lot, watching his carefully constructed narrative collapse around him. He'd terminated a rogue physician, only to have the United States Navy immediately recruit her for a classified emergency. His phone was already buzzing with calls from the hospital board, from reporters who'd caught wind of the helicopter landing, from attorneys who sensed a public relations disaster in the making. But none of them knew what Elena Martinez knew, that in approximately 90 minutes, she'd be performing surgery in conditions that made her emergency room procedure look like a training exercise. And none of them knew that the woman walking toward that helicopter had once been declared dead by the U.S. Navy, her service records classified at levels most admirals never accessed, her skills developed in places that officially didn't exist. Carson Blackwell had fired a hospital physician, but the Navy was about to get back one of the most decorated submarine surgeons in classified military history. And Admiral James Kovac, dying somewhere in the dark Pacific, had just set in motion events that would change everything Elena had worked to build, and destroy everything Blackwell thought he knew about the woman he'd dismissed as a reckless cowboy doctor. The elevator to the roof seemed to move in slow motion, though Elena knew it was traveling at normal speed. Commander Chen stood beside her in silence, one hand on her radio, coordinating with the helicopter crew. Elena's heart was pounding in a way it hadn't since her last submarine deployment, each beat reminding her that the past never really stayed buried. Commander, Elena said quietly, how did you find me? Chen's expression remained neutral. Admiral Kovac maintained a sealed file on you. Instructions were clear. If he ever faced a nuclear medical emergency, we were to locate you, regardless of your civilian status. He promised me I was done, that I could disappear. Apparently, he lied. Chen's voice softened slightly. Or maybe he knew that some promises can't be kept when lives are at stake. The elevator doors opened to the roof access corridor. The sound of the helicopter's rotors was deafening now, the downdraft whipping their clothes as they emerged into the fading daylight. Elena instinctively ducked her head, muscle memory from hundreds of helicopter transports taking over before her conscious mind could catch up. The crew chief was waiting at the helicopter's open door, hand extended to help her aboard. Elena grabbed the safety handle and pulled herself in without assistance, her body remembering the motion even after 6 years of civilian life. Chen climbed in behind her and immediately signaled the pilot. We're up. Get us to the coordinates, now. The helicopter lifted off before Elena had even fastened her safety harness. Through the open door, she could see Mercy General Hospital shrinking below them, could see the crowd that had gathered in the parking lot, phones raised to capture footage of the mysterious military evacuation. Somewhere down there, Carson Blackwell was probably having a stroke trying to explain this to the hospital board. Good, Elena thought with bitter satisfaction. Let him sweat. Chen handed her a tablet, its screen displaying classified information that made Elena's stomach drop. "This is what we're dealing with." The USS Nevada, one of our Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines, experienced a reactor cooling system failure during a training exercise 40 miles offshore. Admiral Kovac was aboard as an observer when the emergency occurred. Elena scanned the medical data, her trained eye immediately recognizing the severity. Radiation exposure levels at 400 millisieverts. That's survivable if treated quickly, but... She stopped, her finger hovering over a line of text that made her blood run cold. "It says here, he was in the reactor compartment when the breach occurred. That's not observation, Commander. That's intervention." "The initial reports are unclear about exactly what happened," Chen said carefully. "But yes, it appears the Admiral entered the reactor space to manually activate emergency cooling protocols." "That's suicide," Elena whispered. Even with protective gear, the exposure rates in an active reactor breach, he saved 43 crew members who would have died within minutes if he hadn't acted, Chen interrupted. "But yes, the exposure was severe, and complicated by blunt force trauma when the cooling system failure caused a pressure explosion. He was thrown against a bulkhead. Our medical officer reports possible internal bleeding, potential cardiac involvement, and radiation poisoning that's progressing faster than predicted." Elena's hands were shaking as she read through the rest of the report. This wasn't just a medical emergency. This was exactly the scenario she'd lived through 6 years ago on the USS Columbia, the classified mission that had ended her military career and forced her into hiding. "How many people know I'm coming?" she asked. "The helicopter crew, myself, and the Nevada's captain, Commander Michael Torres." "The medical officer knows we're bringing in a specialist, but doesn't know your identity. As far as the rest of the crew is concerned, you're Dr. Elena Martinez, civilian consultant with classified medical credentials." "And when they see my face? When they recognize Commander Rodriguez, who's supposed to be dead?" Chen met her eyes directly. "The crew currently aboard the Nevada wasn't in service 6 years ago. Torres knows your background, but he's been briefed to maintain operational security. If anyone asks, you're a civilian specialist, nothing more." "That's not going to work if Kovac's conscious," Elena said. "He'll call me by my real name." "Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Right now, focus on keeping him alive." The helicopter banked sharply, heading out over the Pacific Ocean. Elena could see the coastline disappearing behind them, the familiar sensation of leaving land behind triggering memories she'd worked hard to suppress. The last time she'd flown out to a submarine emergency, 3 men had been dying from radiation exposure and reactor coolant burns. She'd saved them all by performing surgery in a contaminated environment while the submarine's reactor team fought to prevent a meltdown. She'd also disobeyed a direct order from her commanding officer, who'd told her to let those men die to preserve the reactor's integrity. That disobedience had saved 47 lives. It had also made her a liability the Navy couldn't publicly acknowledge. "Commander Chen," Elena said slowly, "why would Kovac risk his life entering a reactor space? He's an admiral. He doesn't do hands-on emergency response anymore." "That's classified. Everything about my existence is classified. Tell me what's really happening." Chen was quiet for a long moment, weighing operational security against the need for Elena to understand the full situation. The USS Nevada was testing a new reactor safety protocol, something experimental, developed after the Columbia incident 6 years ago. When the cooling system failed, the automated safety measures didn't engage properly. Kovac realized that if the reactor went into full meltdown, we'd have a nuclear disaster 40 miles from San Diego. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "So he activated the protocols manually?" "Using procedures that you developed during the Columbia crisis." He was the only person aboard who knew how to implement them. "Because those procedures are still classified," Elena said bitterly. "Because acknowledging they exist would mean acknowledging what happened on the Columbia, which would mean acknowledging that a submarine nearly melted down off the coast of California, and the Navy covered it up." "It's more complicated than that." "It always is." The pilot's voice crackled over the internal comm system. "We've got visual on the Nevada. She's surfaced and stabilized. Medical team is standing by for immediate transfer." Elena looked out the helicopter's door and saw the massive submarine breaching the ocean's surface like a surfacing whale. Even from this altitude, she could see the emergency response teams moving on the deck, the organized chaos of a military vessel in crisis mode. The Nevada was nearly 600 feet long, capable of carrying 24 Trident II ballistic missiles and a crew of 155. Somewhere inside that steel hull, Admiral Kovac was dying from radiation poisoning and internal injuries. And he'd specifically asked for her. The helicopter descended toward the submarine's deck, the rotor wash creating patterns on the ocean's surface. Elena's medical training kicked in automatically, her mind running through the procedures she'd need to implement. Radiation decontamination protocols, assessment for internal bleeding, possible cardiac tamponade from the blunt force trauma. "Dr. Martinez," Chen's voice pulled her back to the present. "Before we land, you need to understand something. The Nevada's crew doesn't know about the Columbia. They don't know that similar reactor safety procedures saved lives 6 years ago. If this mission succeeds, if you save Admiral Kovac and help stabilize the reactor situation, the Navy might finally be ready to declassify what happened on the Columbia, to acknowledge your service publicly." "I don't want acknowledgement," Elena said flatly. "I want to save lives and be left alone. That's not an option anymore. Whatever happens in the next few hours, your cover is blown. Carson Blackwell will talk to reporters. Hospital staff will share videos of the helicopter landing. The media will dig into your background. And eventually, someone will connect Dr. Elena Martinez to Commander Elena Rodriguez." The helicopter touched down on the submarine's deck with a jarring thud. The side door slid open, and immediately a young medical officer was there, shouting over the rotor noise. "Dr. Martinez? I'm Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the Nevada's medical officer. We need you below deck immediately. The Admiral's condition is deteriorating rapidly." Elena grabbed the medical kit Chen handed her and jumped down to the deck. Her feet hit the non-skid surface, and suddenly, she was back in her element. The smell of salt water and diesel fuel, the feeling of a deck rolling beneath her feet, the sound of a submarine's machinery humming below. "Status report," she said to Morrison as they moved toward the deck hatch. "Admiral Kovac is conscious but disoriented. Radiation exposure estimated at 450 millisieverts and climbing. We've administered potassium iodide and started fluid resuscitation, but he's showing signs of acute radiation syndrome. Vomiting, disorientation, elevated heart rate. And we're seeing evidence of internal bleeding from the trauma." They descended into the submarine's interior, the narrow passages and low ceilings instantly familiar to Elena despite the years away. Crew members pressed against the bulkheads to let them pass, their faces showing the controlled tension of sailors who knew their ship was in serious trouble. "Where's Captain Torres?" Elena asked. "In the reactor control room, ma'am. He's overseeing the emergency cooling procedures. He asked me to brief you and get you started on the Admiral's treatment." They reached the medical bay, a cramped space barely larger than a walk-in closet, packed with equipment and currently occupied by 2 corpsmen who were monitoring the Admiral's vital signs. And there, on the examination table, was Admiral James Kovac. He looked older than Elena remembered, his hair completely gray now, his face drawn with pain and illness. But when his eyes focused on her, she saw immediate recognition, despite his disorientation. "Rodriguez," he whispered, his voice rough. "You came." Every person in the medical bay froze. Lieutenant Morrison's eyes widened. The corpsmen exchanged confused glances. Commander Chen, who'd followed them below, stepped forward smoothly. "Admiral, you're disoriented from the radiation exposure. This is Dr. Elena Martinez, civilian medical consultant." But Kovac wasn't having it. His hand shot out and grabbed Elena's wrist with surprising strength. "Don't lie to my crew, Sarah. She's Commander Elena Rodriguez, the best damn submarine surgeon the Navy ever had. And she's about to save my life using procedures she invented on the Columbia." The silence in the medical bay was absolute. Morrison looked at Elena with new eyes, clearly trying to reconcile the civilian consultant he'd been briefed about with a Navy commander who supposedly didn't exist. "Admiral," Elena said quietly, "you're not helping matters." "Good. I'm dying, Rodriguez. I don't have time for operational security theater." He turned his head toward Morrison. "Lieutenant, whatever Dr. Martinez tells you to do, you do it immediately. No questions, no hesitation. She has more experience with nuclear medical emergencies than anyone in the fleet." "Sir," Morrison said carefully, "with all due respect, Dr. Martinez's credentials list her as a civilian emergency medicine physician." "My credentials are classified at levels you don't have clearance for," Elena interrupted. She'd spent 6 years hiding, 6 years trying to be someone else, but Kovac had just blown her cover completely. There was no point in maintaining the fiction anymore. "Lieutenant Morrison, I need you to accept that I know what I'm doing and follow my instructions exactly. We can sort out the paperwork later if the Admiral survives." She turned to the corpsman. "I need radiation exposure readings for everyone who's been in contact with the Admiral, and I need to know the current status of the reactor containment." One of the corpsmen pulled up data on a nearby monitor. "Reactor temperature is stabilizing, but still above safe parameters. The emergency cooling system that Admiral Kovac manually activated is functioning, but we're seeing fluctuations that suggest potential secondary failures." Elena studied the data, her mind already 3 steps ahead. "That means we have a narrow window. If the reactor destabilizes again, radiation levels throughout this section of the ship will spike. We need to work fast." She moved to Kovac's side and began a rapid physical examination. His skin was clammy, his pulse rapid and weak. When she palpated his abdomen, he winced sharply. "Internal bleeding," she confirmed. "Probably splenic injury from the impact. Combined with the radiation exposure, his blood isn't going to clot properly. We need to operate now." Morrison's face went pale. "Ma'am, with all due respect, submarine medical bays aren't equipped for major surgery. We have basic trauma capabilities, but you've never done this under these conditions," Elena finished. "I have. Multiple times. And Admiral Kovac is counting on that experience." She looked directly at Kovac, who was watching her with an expression that might have been pride or might have been pain. "Sir, I need to know. Is this really an accident? Or did you orchestrate this entire scenario?" Kovac's laugh turned into a cough that brought up blood. "You always were too smart for your own good, Commander. Let's just say the reactor test was real, but my presence aboard was strategically planned." "You used yourself as bait," Elena said, understanding flooding through her. "You knew that if you created a nuclear medical emergency similar to the Columbia, the Navy would have no choice but to bring me back, to acknowledge that my procedures work." "Desperate times," Kovac whispered. "The reactor safety program needs validation. The Columbia protocols need to be declassified so they can be properly taught. And you need to stop hiding in civilian hospitals when you could be saving lives at the highest levels of military medicine." "So you deliberately exposed yourself to lethal radiation to prove a point?" "I exposed myself to survivable radiation," Kovac corrected. "Assuming I have a brilliant surgeon who knows how to treat combined radiation exposure and traumatic injury in a submarine environment." "Do I have that surgeon, Commander Rodriguez?" Elena looked around the medical bay at the faces watching her. Morrison, who was clearly reevaluating everything he thought he knew, the corpsmen, who were waiting for direction, Chen, who stood in the doorway with an expression that suggested this was all going exactly according to someone's plan. And she realized that Kovac had been right about one thing. She'd stopped being Elena Martinez the moment she'd stepped aboard this helicopter. The woman who'd tried to hide in civilian medicine for 6 years didn't exist anymore. "Yes, sir," she said finally. "You have that surgeon, but when this is over, you and I are going to have a very serious conversation about using yourself as a guinea pig." "Looking forward to it, Commander," Kovac said. Then his eyes rolled back in his head, and the cardiac monitor started screaming. "He's in VFib!" Morrison shouted, his hands already reaching for the defibrillator paddles. "Charging to 200! Stop!" Elena's command cut through the chaos like a scalpel. "You shock him now with this level of radiation exposure and you'll cause irreversible cardiac damage. His cellular structure is already compromised." Morrison's hand froze over the defibrillator controls. "Ma'am, with all due respect, ventricular fibrillation is lethal. We have maybe 2 minutes before his brain starts dying, I know." Elena was already pulling on surgical gloves, her movements precise despite the cramped space. "But his heart isn't fibrillating because of a cardiac event. It's fibrillating because radiation is disrupting his electrolyte balance, and the internal bleeding is causing hypovolemic shock. We need to address the bleeding first." She turned to the nearest corpsman, a young man whose name tag read, Jenkins. "I need you to start pushing calcium chloride and magnesium sulfate. His cellular membranes are breaking down from radiation damage, and we need to stabilize them before we can address the cardiac rhythm." Jenkins looked to Morrison for confirmation. The lieutenant's face was a mask of conflict. His training told him to defibrillate immediately, but something in Elena's absolute certainty made him hesitate. "Do it," Morrison said finally. "But Dr. Martinez, if this doesn't work—" "Then you can blame me at my court-martial," Elena said. She placed her hands on Kovac's chest, feeling for the specific anatomical landmarks she'd memorized years ago. "How long since the reactor breach?" 47 minutes, Chen said from the doorway, checking her tactical watch. "And he's been symptomatic for how long?" "He started vomiting about 20 minutes ago," Morrison replied. "Disorientation began shortly after." Elena's mind calculated rapidly. Acute radiation syndrome progressing this quickly meant exposure levels were higher than the initial estimates. Combined with internal bleeding and now cardiac arrest, Kovac's survival window was narrowing by the second. "The bleeding is splenic," she said, more to herself than to the others. "The impact threw him against a bulkhead, ruptured his spleen. Blood is accumulating in his abdominal cavity, reducing his effective blood volume and putting pressure on his diaphragm. That's compromising his cardiac function." "How can you possibly know that without imaging?" Morrison asked. "Because I've seen it before. Same injury pattern, same presentation." Elena looked up at the lieutenant. "On the Columbia, 6 years ago. 3 crew members with radiation exposure and blunt force trauma. I saved all 3 using procedures that are about to save your admiral." The cardiac monitor's alarm was a constant shriek now. Kovac's heart rate was erratic, his blood pressure dropping into dangerous territory. Jenkins finished administering the electrolyte correction, his hands shaking slightly. "Calcium chloride is in," he reported. "Magnesium sulfate pushing now." Elena felt Kovac's pulse at his carotid artery, weak, thready, but still present. "Morrison, I need you to prepare for emergency laparotomy. We're going to open his abdomen and control the splenic bleeding directly." "Here?" Morrison's voice cracked slightly. "In the medical bay? Without proper imaging? Without a full surgical team?" "We don't have a choice. If we try to transfer him to a hospital, he'll die en route. If we wait for better conditions, he'll die from hypovolemic shock. This is happening now, in this room, with what we have available." Chen stepped forward. "Commander Rodriguez, I need to inform you that we've received updated intelligence from the reactor control room." Captain Torres reports that the cooling system Admiral Kovac activated is showing signs of instability. If it fails completely, radiation levels in this section of the ship will increase by a factor of 10. How long do we have? 30 minutes, maybe less. The number hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. 30 minutes to perform emergency surgery in a contaminated environment while radiation levels were potentially spiking. Elena met Chen's eyes. Then I suggest you evacuate everyone who isn't essential to this operation. That includes you, Commander. I'm not leaving. That's not a request. It's a medical directive from the senior medical officer present. Elena turned to Morrison. Lieutenant, who are your two best corpsmen? Jenkins and Petty Officer Rodriguez. No relation to you, ma'am, Morrison added quickly. Get Rodriguez in here. Everyone else clears out. That includes you, Commander Chen. I need you coordinating with Captain Torres and monitoring the reactor situation. If those radiation levels spike before I'm finished, I need to know immediately. Chen looked like she wanted to argue, but recognized the military logic. Understood. But, Commander, if the reactor destabilizes, the captain has orders to emergency dive this boat, with or without you finishing the surgery. How long would I have? 5 minutes from the alarm, maybe less if the situation deteriorates rapidly. Elena nodded once, filing that information away. Then let's hope the reactor behaves. Morrison, start prepping for surgery. Jenkins, I need you to establish a second IV line and start massive transfusion protocol. We're going to lose a lot of blood once I open him up. Morrison was pulling surgical supplies from storage compartments, his hands moving on autopilot while his mind clearly struggled with the impossibility of what they were attempting. Dr. Martinez, Commander Rodriguez, whoever you are, I need you to understand that I've never done anything like this. The most complex procedure I've performed on a submarine was an emergency appendectomy. Then consider this your advanced trauma course, Elena said. She was scrubbing her hands with antiseptic solution, the familiar ritual calming her racing thoughts. I'll walk you through every step, but I need you to trust me completely. No second guessing, no hesitation. Can you do that? Morrison met her eyes, and she saw the moment he made his decision. Yes, ma'am. Whatever you need. Petty Officer Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, a lean Hispanic man in his mid-20s with intelligent eyes that took in the situation instantly. Lieutenant Morrison, Commander Chen said you needed me for emergency surgery. Get scrubbed and gowned, Morrison ordered. We're doing an exploratory laparotomy on Admiral Kovac. Rodriguez's eyes widened fractionally, but he moved immediately to comply. Elena appreciated that. No questions, no panic, just professional competence under pressure. While the team prepared, Elena performed a rapid ultrasound examination of Kovac's abdomen using the medical bay's portable unit. The image was grainy, but clear enough to confirm her diagnosis. Free fluid in the abdominal cavity, the spleen showing irregular margins consistent with rupture, and the characteristic pattern of blood accumulating around the left upper quadrant. Positive fast exam, she announced, using the military acronym for Focused Assessment with Sonography in Trauma. Significant hemoperitoneum. We're looking at a grade 4 or 5 splenic laceration. That requires a full trauma team and an operating room, Morrison said, but his tone was resigned rather than argumentative. He knew they were past the point of ideal conditions. It requires a skilled surgeon and adequate equipment, Elena corrected. We have both. Now let's get started before the reactor decides to kill us all. She positioned herself at Kovac's left side, Morrison across from her, with Jenkins and Rodriguez managing the IV lines and monitoring equipment. The medical bay was absurdly cramped for surgery, barely enough room to move, let alone handle complications. But Elena had worked in worse conditions. At least this submarine wasn't actively under fire. Scalpel, she said, and Morrison placed the instrument in her hand with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual countless times, even if never under these circumstances. Ina made her incision along the midline, moving with the swift confidence that came from having done this procedure in conditions that made the current situation look luxurious. Blood welled up immediately, confirming the severity of the internal bleeding. "Suction," she said, and Jenkins was there with the device before she'd finished the word. The blood cleared, giving her a view of the abdominal cavity. The spleen was definitely ruptured, bleeding steadily into the peritoneal space. "Morrison, I need you to retract here." She indicated the specific location. "Rodriguez, get ready to hand me clamps. This is going to move fast once I start controlling the bleeding vessels." The reactor alarm chose that moment to sound. Not the full emergency klaxon, but a warning tone that made everyone in the medical bay tense. "That's the reactor temperature increasing," Morrison said, his voice tight. "Captain Torres must be dealing with the cooling system fluctuations Commander Chen mentioned." "Can you work through it?" Elena asked. "Do I have a choice?" "No." "Then yes, ma'am." Elena isolated the splenic artery, her fingers working in the cramped space with practiced precision. This was the critical moment. If she couldn't control the arterial bleeding, Kovac would exsanguinate before she could complete the repair. "Clamp," she said, and Rodriguez placed it in her hand. She applied it to the artery, and the bleeding immediately slowed. "Good. Now I need to assess the damage. Morrison, give me better exposure here." As Morrison repositioned his retractor, the submarine lurched suddenly. Not a major movement, but enough to make everyone grab for support. Instruments rattled in their trays, and Jenkins had to steady the IV pole to prevent it from toppling. "What was that?" Rodriguez asked. "Emergency ballast adjustment," Morrison said grimly. "Captain Torres is preparing for possible emergency dive procedures." Elena didn't look up from the surgical field. "How much time do we have?" "Unknown, but if the captain sounds the dive alarm, we'll have 5 minutes to secure everything before the boat submerges." "Then I'll work faster." Elena was already dissecting around the spleen, evaluating whether she could salvage it or if she needed to remove it entirely. In a hospital with unlimited resources and time, she'd try to preserve as much splenic tissue as possible. Here, with radiation exposure complicating healing and a reactor threatening to melt down, the calculus was different. "We're taking the whole spleen," she announced. "It's too damaged to salvage, and we can't risk ongoing bleeding with his radiation exposure affecting his clotting factors." She worked swiftly, ligating blood vessels and separating the spleen from its attachments. Morrison followed her instructions precisely, his initial nervousness replaced by focused concentration. Rodriguez anticipated her needs, instruments appearing in her hand almost before she asked for them. Jenkins monitored Kovac's vital signs with worried eyes. "Heart rate is stabilizing, blood pressure coming up slightly. He's responding to the transfusion." "Good," Elena said. "That means we're winning the race against the bleeding. How much blood have we given him?" 4 units so far. We've got 6 more available if needed." "We'll need them. His radiation exposure is going to cause ongoing coagulopathy. Morrison, get ready to place surgical pads here and here. Once I remove the spleen, we're going to have some oozing from the splenic bed that we'll need to control." The reactor alarm changed pitch, becoming more urgent. Through the medical bay's open hatch, Elena could hear the sound of crew members moving rapidly through the submarine's passages, responding to orders she couldn't hear clearly. "That's the 30-minute warning," Morrison said, his voice strained. "Radiation levels are approaching critical thresholds in the reactor compartment." "How long until they reach critical levels here?" "If the cooling system continues to degrade, 10 minutes, maybe 15. Elena's hands never stopped moving. The spleen was almost free now, just a few more vessel ligatures to complete. "Then we'll be done in 8. Rodriguez, prepare the specimen container. Jenkins, I want another bolus of platelets ready. His clotting is going to be compromised once we finish." The spleen came free, and Elena placed it carefully in the container Rodriguez held ready. The organ was destroyed, torn nearly in half by the force of Kovac's impact against the bulkhead. No question about the diagnosis now. Checking for other injuries, Elena said, her hands exploring the abdominal cavity systematically. Liver looks intact. Kidneys palpate normally. No obvious bowel injuries. The spleen took the brunt of the impact. Small favors, Morrison muttered. Very small. Elena began the process of achieving hemostasis, making sure every bleeding vessel was controlled. This was the tedious part, the careful work that separated adequate surgeons from excellent ones. Rush it, and the patient bled to death postoperatively. Take too long, and the reactor killed everyone in the medical bay. The submarine lurched again, more violently this time. The lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, Elena heard the sound of metal groaning under stress. Captain Torres is fighting to maintain position, Morrison said, his face pale. The reactor instability is affecting our power systems. Elena focused on her work, blocking out everything except the surgical field in front of her. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd lived through on the Columbia. The ability to maintain absolute focus while the world fell apart around her. Last bleeder controlled, she announced. Morrison, start closing the peritoneum. Rodriguez, prepare the fascial sutures. We're going to close this in layers, but we're going to do it fast. Her radio crackled, Chen's voice cutting through the static. Commander Rodriguez, this is Commander Chen. Captain Torres reports reactor cooling system failure is accelerating. Radiation levels in your section are rising. He strongly recommends evacuating the medical bay. Negative, Elena said without looking up from her work. We're closing now. 5 minutes. You don't have 5 minutes. The captain estimates 3 minutes before radiation levels become immediately life-threatening. Morrison's hands shook slightly as he placed sutures in the peritoneum. Elena reached across and steadied them with her own, meeting his eyes. We finished this, Lieutenant. The Admiral didn't risk his life activating that reactor so we could leave him on the table. You understand? Morrison swallowed hard but nodded. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Good man. Now close that layer while I start on the fascia. They worked in synchronized silence, 4 sets of hands moving in practiced coordination. Elena could feel the temperature in the medical bay rising. Whether from the reactor or her imagination, she couldn't tell. The radiation detectors on their surgical gowns were starting to show yellow indicators, warning of elevated exposure. Almost there, Elena said, placing the final fascial suture. Skin closure, Rodriguez. Use the stapler, it's faster. Rodriguez worked quickly, the surgical stapler clicking rhythmically as he closed the incision. 20 staples, 25, 30. The dive alarm sounded, a piercing klaxon that meant Captain Torres had run out of options. That's it, Morrison shouted over the noise. We have to evacuate now. Finish the closure, Elena commanded. Rodriguez, keep stapling. Jenkins, prepare for patient transport. Morrison, you're with me to move him. Commander, the dive procedure. We'll wait 30 more seconds. Finish the closure. Rodriguez placed the last staple just as Chen burst into the medical bay, her face flushed from running through the submarine's passages. The captain has ordered immediate dive to reduce radiation exposure. We need to move the Admiral to the aft torpedo room. It's shielded and away from the reactor compartment. Then let's move, Elena said. She and Morrison grabbed the portable stretcher, while Jenkins and Rodriguez managed the IV lines and monitoring equipment. They lifted Kovac as the submarine began its emergency descent, the deck tilting beneath their feet. The journey through the submarine's passages was nightmare navigation. Tight corners, steep ladders, the constant sensation of the deck shifting as the boat dove. Kovac remained unconscious, mercifully unaware of the chaos around him. They reached the torpedo room just as the submarine leveled off at depth. The radiation detectors showed lower readings here, confirming that the shielding was effective. Elena checked Kovac's vital signs immediately. Heart rate steady, blood pressure stabilizing, respiratory rate acceptable. She looked at Morrison. He's going to make it. The surgery was successful. Morrison sagged against a bulkhead, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard. I can't believe we just did that. Emergency surgery during a reactor crisis while the boat was preparing to dive. You did well, Lieutenant, Elena said. All of you did. Jenkins, Rodriguez, excellent work maintaining his vital signs under those conditions. Chen approached, her tactical radio pressed to her ear. Captain Torres reports the emergency dive has reduced radiation exposure levels ship-wide. The reactor is still unstable, but the cooling system failure has been contained for now. She paused, listening to her radio. And he wants to speak with Commander Rodriguez immediately. Elena followed Chen through the submarine's passages to the control room. Captain Torres was a compact man in his early 40s, his face showing the stress of managing a nuclear crisis while simultaneously conducting an emergency medical evacuation. When Elena entered, he turned from his tactical displays. Commander Rodriguez, he said, his voice carrying relief and respect. Lieutenant Morrison reports the surgery was successful. The Admiral is stable. For now, Elena cautioned. His radiation exposure is going to cause ongoing medical issues. He needs to reach a proper facility with radiation treatment capabilities within the next 24 hours. Understood. We're coordinating with Naval Hospital San Diego for immediate transfer once we surface. Torres studied her with open curiosity. Commander Chen briefed me on your background. The Columbia incident. I read the classified after-action reports when I took command of the Nevada. What you did on that boat, saving 3 men while the reactor was in meltdown, it's legendary in the submarine community. It was necessary, Elena said simply, just like today was necessary. Admiral Kovac told me something before he entered the reactor compartment, Torres said slowly. He said this entire scenario was designed to prove that your procedures work, that radiation medical protocols developed during crisis situations could be validated and implemented fleet-wide. He paused. Was he telling the truth? Did he deliberately create this emergency? Elena met the captain's eyes directly. You'd have to ask the Admiral that question, Captain. But I will tell you this. James Kovac is the most dedicated officer I've ever served under. If he believed that validating critical medical procedures required taking personal risks, he would absolutely do it. Whether that makes him brilliant or insane is above my pay grade. Torres almost smiled. Sounds like the Admiral I know. His expression grew serious again. Commander, regardless of how this situation came about, you saved his life today. You also saved my boat. If that reactor had fully melted down 40 miles from San Diego. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The implications were clear. A nuclear submarine reactor meltdown so close to a major American city would have been a catastrophe beyond measure. Environmental disaster, political crisis, potential civilian casualties. The ripple effects were almost incomprehensible. Captain, Elena said quietly, I think we both know this wasn't just about proving medical procedures. This was about Admiral Kovac forcing the Navy's hand, making them acknowledge that the Columbia incident happened, that the procedures I developed work, and that hiding classified medical advances costs lives. You think he orchestrated all of this just to make a political point? I think he orchestrated all of this because he believes in doing the right thing, regardless of political consequences. That's who James Kovac is. Before Torres could respond, the control room's communications officer called out urgently. Captain, we're receiving multiple radio transmissions from shore, news media, requesting confirmation of reports about a military medical emergency involving a senior naval officer and a mysterious civilian surgeon who's supposedly dead. Torres closed his eyes briefly. So much for operational security. It gets worse, sir, the communications officer continued. We're also receiving transmissions from Mercy General Hospital's administration. Apparently, there's video footage all over social media showing Dr. Elena Martinez being evacuated by military helicopter after being fired by the hospital director. The story is going viral. Chen pulled out her tablet and brought up several news websites. The headlines were sensational and immediate. Fired doctor evacuated by Navy for secret mission. Hospital director terminates physician. Military helicopter lands minutes later. Who is Dr. Elena Martinez, and why did the Navy need her? Your civilian cover is completely blown, Chen said to Elena. Within hours, investigative journalists are going to connect Dr. Elena Martinez to Commander Elena Rodriguez. The Columbia incident is going to be exposed whether the Navy wants it declassified or not. Good, a weak voice said from the torpedo room hatch. Admiral Kovac stood there, supported by Lieutenant Morrison, and looking like death warmed over, but conscious and determined. That's exactly what needs to happen. Admiral, Morrison protested, you should be resting. You just had major surgery. I've had worse. Kovac made his way into the control room, moving carefully but under his own power. Captain Torres, I need you to send a message to Naval Command. Tell them that I'm declassifying the Columbia incident effective immediately. All reports, all procedures, all outcomes. Sir, Torres said carefully, you don't have the authority to unilaterally declassify. I do when the alternative is a media firestorm that exposes it anyway, Kovac interrupted. Better to control the narrative and release the information on our terms. Commander Rodriguez's procedures saved lives on the Columbia. They saved lives today on the Nevada. It's time the Navy acknowledged that publicly. Elena felt something shifting inside her. 6 years of hiding, of denying who she really was, suddenly becoming unnecessary. Kovac was right. Her cover was blown regardless. The only question was whether the truth came out in scattered leaks or in controlled disclosure. Admiral, she said slowly, if you declassify the Columbia, you're going to face significant political consequences. The Navy covered up a near meltdown for 6 years. Congress will want hearings. Careers will end. Kovac smiled weakly. Then they'll end. But the procedures you developed will be taught to every submarine medical officer in the fleet. And future James Kovacs won't have to stage reactor emergencies to prove that good medicine works. He swayed slightly, and Morrison immediately moved to support him. Sir, please. You need to rest before you collapse. In a minute. Kovac focused on Elena with the intensity she remembered from their deployments together. Commander Rodriguez, I'm officially requesting that you return to active duty as the Navy's Director of Submarine Medical Operations. Full rank restoration, public acknowledgement of your service, and authority to implement your protocols across the entire submarine fleet. The offer hung in the air like a depth charge waiting to explode. Elena looked around the control room, at Captain Torres, who was watching her with respect, at Commander Chen, whose expression suggested this had been the plan all along, at Morrison and the corpsman from the medical bay, who had just witnessed her work under impossible conditions. I'll need to think about it, she said finally. Fair enough, Kovac smiled. But, Commander, do me one favor. When you're thinking about it, remember that kid you saved at Mercy General this morning, Marcus Williams. Think about how many more Marcus Williams are out there who need doctors with your skills and training. Then decide whether hiding in civilian hospitals is really the best use of your talents. Before Elena could respond, the communications officer spoke up again. Captain, we're receiving an urgent transmission from Naval Hospital San Diego. They're preparing a full radiation treatment team for Admiral Kovac's arrival. And, sir, he paused, looking uncomfortable. They're also requesting that Commander Rodriguez remain on active status pending a formal review of the Nevada incident. Looks like your decision just got made for you, Kovac said quietly. Welcome back to the Navy, Commander. The USS Nevada surfaced 3 hours later, breaking through the Pacific waters like a breaching whale. Elena stood in the control room watching the periscope feed as San Diego's coastline appeared in the distance, knowing that everything waiting for her on shore represented a life she could no longer claim. "Commander," Captain Torres said, "we're receiving multiple requests from media outlets for statements. Naval Public Affairs is scrambling to control the narrative, but the story's already everywhere. Hospital security footage, witness testimonies, speculation about your identity. It's a full media circus." "Let me guess," Elena said. "Carson Blackwell is giving interviews." "He tried," Torres replied with a slight smile. "Naval JAG shut him down about an hour ago. Turns out threatening to prosecute a decorated naval officer tends to get the military's legal department interested in your employment practices." Chen approached with her tablet, showing multiple news feeds. "It's worse than we anticipated, Commander. Someone leaked portions of your Columbia service record, not the classified operations, but enough to establish that Dr. Elena Martinez and Commander Elena Rodriguez are the same person. Social media is calling you the ghost surgeon, a naval officer who supposedly died 6 years ago, but has been saving lives in a civilian hospital." "Catchy," Elena muttered. She moved to where Admiral Kovac was resting on a stretcher, his color better now after 3 hours of fluid resuscitation and radiation treatment. "Sir, you need to stop smiling. This is a disaster." "This is victory," Kovac corrected weakly. "The Navy can't hide your service anymore. The Columbia protocols are going to be declassified whether the brass likes it or not, and Carson Blackwell is about to learn that firing a naval officer for doing her job has consequences." "He didn't know I was Navy." "He knew you were exceptional. He knew you saved lives. He terminated you anyway because your competence threatened his authority." Kovac coughed, wincing at the pain. "Men like Blackwell are why good people leave medicine. Today he learns that actions have consequences." Lieutenant Morrison appeared with updated vital signs. "Admiral, your radiation levels are dropping, but you're still well above safe parameters. The treatment team at Naval Hospital is standing by, but they're estimating you'll need at least 2 weeks of intensive chelation therapy." 2 weeks of lying in a hospital bed while Congress tears apart my career? Kovac shook his head. "I've had worse assignments." The submarine's communications officer called out, "Captain, we have incoming helicopter transport. Naval Hospital San Diego is sending their rapid response team to evacuate Admiral Kovac immediately upon docking." "And Commander Rodriguez?" Torres asked. "She's requested to accompany the Admiral for medical continuity." The communications officer paused. "And, sir, we're also receiving word that Mercy General Hospital's board of directors has called an emergency session. Apparently, the media coverage has triggered a full investigation into Dr. Blackwell's termination decisions." Elena felt a grim satisfaction at that news. Blackwell had built his reputation on rigid protocol enforcement, but firing someone who saved a teenager's life and then turned out to be a decorated military surgeon? That was career suicide, even for someone as arrogant as Carson Blackwell. The Nevada docked at Naval Base San Diego 40 minutes later. The pier was controlled chaos. Medical personnel, security teams, naval officers of various ranks, and just visible beyond the security perimeter, news crews with cameras trained on every movement. "They're not even trying to hide anymore," Chen observed, watching the media presence through the submarine's external cameras. "This is going to be the lead story on every news channel tonight." "Good," Kovac said from his stretcher as Corman prepared to move him. "Transparency is how democracy works. The Navy's had 6 years of secrecy. Time for some sunshine." The medical evacuation was executed with military precision. Admiral Kovac was transferred to a waiting helicopter within minutes, Elena accompanying him, along with Morrison and Chen. As the helicopter lifted off, Elena looked down at the submarine that had been both a battlefield and an operating room. "Commander," Kovac said, his voice stronger now despite his injuries. "Before we reach the hospital, there's something you need to know. The Nevada incident wasn't entirely my plan." Elena turned to face him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I orchestrated being aboard during the reactor test, and I planned to intervene if something went wrong. But I didn't cause the cooling system failure. That was genuine equipment malfunction." He met her eyes directly. "Someone wanted this test to fail, Elena. Someone wanted to prove that the Columbia protocols were either unnecessary or ineffective." The implications hit her like cold water. "You're saying the reactor failure was sabotage?" "I'm saying naval intelligence is investigating that possibility. The cooling system that failed had been inspected and certified 2 days ago. The probability of catastrophic failure under normal test conditions was statistically negligible." Chen leaned forward. "Admiral, are you suggesting someone within the Navy deliberately sabotaged a nuclear submarine to discredit Commander Rodriguez's medical procedures?" "I'm suggesting that the Columbia protocols threaten certain people's careers. If my procedures that required disobeying direct orders, become standard practice, it calls into question the officers who issued those orders. The officers who told me to let men die to protect equipment." Elena felt anger building in her chest. "Who gave those orders?" "Vice Admiral Richard Hennessy. He was commander of submarine operations during the Columbia incident. He's the one who ordered you to prioritize reactor containment over casualty treatment. When you disobeyed and saved those 3 men anyway, you made him look weak. Made it look like his orders would have resulted in unnecessary deaths." "His orders would have resulted in unnecessary deaths," Elena said flatly. "Exactly. Which is why he's been fighting the declassification of the Columbia incident for 6 years. If the truth comes out, if your procedures become standard protocol, it proves that his command decisions were wrong. That 3 sailors died unnecessarily under his orders during previous reactor incidents." Morrison was listening with growing horror. "Sir, are you saying a vice admiral sabotaged a submarine to prevent medical procedures from being validated?" "I'm saying naval intelligence is investigating all possibilities. But yes, Lieutenant, that's one theory." Kovac grimaced in pain. "And if it's true, the fallout is going to make today's media circus look like a quiet afternoon." The helicopter touched down at Naval Hospital San Diego's rooftop helipad. A full trauma team was waiting, led by a silver-haired captain who Elena recognized immediately. Dr. Robert Chen, one of the Navy's top radiation medicine specialists, and notably, Commander Sarah Chen's father. "Admiral Kovac," Dr. Chen said as they transferred the stretcher. "You've managed to give yourself acute radiation syndrome, internal bleeding, and a massive public relations headache. Impressive work for a Tuesday afternoon." "Just trying to keep things interesting, Robert," Kovac replied weakly. Dr. Chen's eyes shifted to Elena. "Commander Rodriguez, I read your classified files on the Columbia incident. What you accomplished in that reactor compartment was textbook impossible. I'm looking forward to learning your techniques firsthand." "Assuming I survive the congressional hearings," Elena said. "Oh, you'll survive those. It's the hospital administrators who should be worried." Dr. Chen gestured to his team. "Get the Admiral into the radiation treatment suite. I want full chelation protocol initiated immediately. Commander Rodriguez, you'll need decontamination screening as well. Your radiation exposure today was significant." As they moved Admiral Kovac toward the treatment rooms, a naval officer in dress uniform approached. Commander David Park, Elena recognized the name from Chen's briefings. He was Naval Public Affairs, which meant this conversation was going to be about media management. "Commander Rodriguez," Park said, "I need to brief you on the current media situation before it gets completely out of control. Are you aware that video footage of your termination at Mercy General has over 3 million views on social media?" "I've been slightly busy performing surgery on a submarine," Elena replied. "Media metrics weren't my priority." "They're about to become your priority. We have 6 major news networks requesting interviews, congressional representatives from the Armed Services Committee wanting statements, and Mercy General Hospital's Board of Directors has issued a public statement distancing themselves from Director Blackwell's decision to terminate you." Distancing themselves? 2 hours ago they supported his decision. 2 hours ago they didn't know you were a decorated naval officer who saved lives during classified operations. Now they're facing a public relations nightmare and potential legal liability for wrongful termination of a military reservist. Park pulled out his tablet. "It gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. We've received information that Blackwell is being investigated by the State Medical Board for multiple instances of inappropriate termination of physicians who challenged his authority." Elena processed this information while medical personnel guided her through decontamination procedures. "How many physicians?" 17 over the past 5 years. All of them filed complaints about hostile work environment and retaliatory termination. None of them had your connections to make it a federal case. Park's expression was grim. "Commander, Blackwell's career is over. The question now is how much damage he does trying to defend himself." They entered a private conference room where Commander Sarah Chen was already reviewing intelligence reports. She looked up as Elena entered. "We've got a problem. Vice Admiral Hennessy just issued a statement to the press claiming that the Columbia incident has been misrepresented and that Commander Rodriguez's procedures violated established military medical protocols." "He's trying to get ahead of the story," Elena said immediately. "Control the narrative before the Columbia files are declassified." "Exactly. And he's got political connections. 3 senators on the Armed Services Committee, 2 representatives on the House Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. If he convinces them that you're a rogue officer who endangered submarines by disobeying orders, he can frame the declassification as a cover-up of your misconduct rather than validation of your procedures." Elena sat down heavily. 6 hours ago, she'd been a civilian physician being fired for saving a teenager's life. Now she was in the middle of a political battle that could determine the future of submarine medicine and possibly end multiple military careers. "What does Kovac want me to do?" "Fight," Chen said simply. "The Admiral is recommending that you request a formal military inquiry into the Columbia incident. Full disclosure, public hearings, complete transparency. Force Hennessy to defend his orders under oath." "That will take months, maybe years." "It will also establish the truth, that you saved lives by developing innovative procedures under crisis conditions, that Hennessy's orders would have resulted in unnecessary deaths, that the Navy's 6-year classification of the Columbia incident was designed to protect officers who made bad decisions." Elena's phone buzzed, her civilian phone, the one she'd carried as Dr. Elena Martinez. The caller ID showed Patricia Chen, the nurse from Mercy General. "I need to take this," Elena said, stepping into an adjacent room. "Patricia?" "Dr. Martinez, or should I say, Commander Rodriguez." Patricia's voice carried a mixture of awe and vindication. "You need to know what's happening here. The entire hospital staff has signed a petition demanding Blackwell's resignation. Marcus Williams's family has retained an attorney and is threatening to sue the hospital for emotional distress. And Elena? There are 12 other physicians who've come forward saying Blackwell terminated them for similar reasons, for being too aggressive in saving patients, for prioritizing emergency care over protocol." 12 physicians? 17 total, according to the investigative reporter who's been calling everyone. Your case broke everything open. People are finally willing to talk about what Blackwell's been doing for years, destroying careers of anyone who threatened his authority. Elena leaned against the wall, processing the magnitude of what Patricia was describing. Blackwell hadn't just fired her. He'd been systematically eliminating competent physicians who challenged his rigid adherence to protocol over patient care. "Patricia, I need you to do something for me. Contact those physicians, all of them. Tell them I want their statements documented and submitted to both the State Medical Board and Naval JAG. Blackwell needs to face consequences for every career he destroyed. Already on it, Patricia said. Dr. Martinez, Commander Rodriguez, whatever name you use, you saved Marcus Williams's life this morning. You saved Admiral Kovac's life this afternoon. And now, you're going to save the careers of every physician Blackwell tried to destroy. That's who you are. Elena ended the call and returned to the conference room, where Chen was coordinating with naval intelligence and Park was drafting media statements. Admiral Kovac had been moved to intensive care, but his presence still dominated the conversation. His plan, his sacrifice, his determination to force the truth into daylight. Commander, Park said, we need to make a decision about media strategy. Do we put you in front of cameras or maintain silence while naval intelligence investigates? Before Elena could answer, Dr. Robert Chen entered the room with urgent news. Admiral Kovac's radiation levels are worse than initial estimates. He received approximately 600 millisieverts of exposure, significantly higher than the 450 we initially calculated. He's going to need aggressive treatment, and his prognosis... He paused. He may not survive this. The room fell silent. 600 millisieverts was approaching lethal territory, especially combined with the trauma and surgery Kovac had endured. He knew, Elena said quietly. He knew the exposure was that high when he entered the reactor compartment. He did it anyway. He did it to prove your procedures work, Chen said. To force the Navy's hand on declassification, to make sure your service couldn't be hidden anymore. Elena felt rage building, at Kovac for his martyrdom, at Hennessy for creating conditions that made such sacrifice necessary, at the entire system that valued secrecy over truth and protocol over lives. Set up the media interviews, she told Park. All of them. I want to tell this story on my terms, with my voice, before anyone else controls the narrative. Commander, with respect, that's not how military public affairs works. You'll need to clear statements, coordinate with... I'm not asking for permission, Commander Park. I'm a civilian consultant with military credentials, which means I exist in a legal gray area that gives me more freedom than active duty personnel. I'm going to speak truth about the Columbia, about the Nevada, about Kovac's sacrifice, and about the officers who tried to hide it all. You can help me do that effectively, or you can watch me do it messily. Your choice. Park exchanged glances with Chen. Admiral Kovac warned me you'd say something like that. He also said I should let you do it. He pulled out his tablet. Okay, Commander. Let's burn it all down. Professionally. The first interview was scheduled for that evening, a live broadcast with a national news network. But 2 hours before airtime, Elena received word that Vice Admiral Hennessy had requested an emergency meeting. He arrived at Naval Hospital in full dress uniform, his chest heavy with ribbons and medals accumulated over 30 years of service. He was an imposing man in his early 60s, silver hair perfectly groomed, the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Commander Rodriguez, he said, his voice carrying the condescension of superior rank addressing inferior. I think we should discuss your planned media appearances before you make statements you might regret. I don't regret much, Admiral. Especially not telling the truth. The truth, as you perceive it, could damage national security and undermine confidence in submarine operations. Hennessy sat down without being invited. The Columbia incident was classified for good reasons. Revealing operational details about reactor emergencies gives adversaries intelligence about our capabilities and vulnerabilities. The operational details aren't what I'm planning to discuss, sir. I'm planning to discuss the medical procedures I developed to save lives during reactor emergencies. Procedures that work, that have now been validated twice, and that should be taught to every submarine medical officer in the fleet. Those procedures required you to disobey direct orders, to prioritize individual casualties over reactor containment. That's not a precedent the Navy can endorse. Elena leaned forward. Admiral, let me be very clear about something. On the Columbia, you ordered me to let 3 men die to preserve reactor integrity. I disobeyed that order, saved all 3 men, and still prevented reactor meltdown. Today, Admiral Kovac used those same procedures to prevent catastrophic failure on the Nevada. The procedures work. Your orders were wrong. Hennessy's face reddened. You're a lieutenant commander criticizing the tactical decisions of a vice admiral? That's insubordination. I'm a physician criticizing medical decisions that would have resulted in unnecessary deaths. That's professional obligation. Elena stood. Sir, you can threaten me with insubordination charges. You can try to discredit my service. But Admiral Kovac is dying from radiation exposure he received, proving that my procedures save lives. I'm going on national television tonight to make sure his sacrifice means something. You can either support that mission or get out of my way. If you go public with classified information, the information is being declassified as we speak. Admiral Kovac authorized it before his surgery. So, unless you want to override a dying admiral's direct order, I suggest you adjust your strategy. Hennessy stood slowly. You're making powerful enemies, Commander. I made those enemies 6 years ago when I refused to let men die unnecessarily. Tonight, I'm just making them public. After Hennessy left, Chen approached Elena with updated intelligence. Naval investigators have confirmed sabotage on the Nevada's cooling system. Someone with access to the submarine's reactor compartment disabled redundant safety features that should have prevented the failure. Do they have suspects? 3 engineering personnel with clearance to access the affected systems. All 3 have connections to officers who were reprimanded after the Columbia incident for insufficient reactor safety protocols. Chen paused. Elena, this goes deeper than we thought. It's not just about discrediting your procedures. It's about officers protecting their careers by proving that the Columbia incident was an anomaly, not a systemic problem with how the Navy handles reactor emergencies. How many sailors have died from radiation exposure in reactor incidents that could have been prevented with proper medical intervention? Over the past 15 years, at least 9 confirmed deaths, possibly more that weren't properly reported. 9 lives. 9 sailors who might have survived if the procedures Elena developed on the Columbia had been standard protocol instead of classified secrets. The weight of that number settled on Elena's shoulders like physical pressure. This wasn't just about her career or Kovac's sacrifice anymore. This was about a system that had chosen institutional protection over human lives, repeatedly, for more than a decade. Tonight's interview, Elena said quietly, I want those numbers included. I want people to know what secrecy cost. The television interview was conducted in a Naval Hospital conference room converted into a temporary studio. Elena sat across from Sarah Connors, an investigative journalist with a reputation for holding powerful institutions accountable. Commander Rodriguez, Connors began. 6 hours ago, you were Dr. Elena Martinez, an emergency room physician fired from Mercy General Hospital. Now you're revealed as a decorated naval officer with classified submarine service. Can you help our viewers understand who you really are? Elena took a breath. This was the moment. Full transparency, complete truth. Consequences be damned. I'm both people, Sarah. I'm a physician who believes in saving lives above all else. I'm a naval officer who developed medical procedures during crisis situations. And I'm someone who's been hiding for 6 years because the Navy decided that acknowledging my service was less important than protecting officers who made bad decisions. Bad decisions? During submarine reactor emergencies, protocol has historically prioritized containment over casualty treatment. In 2019, aboard the USS Columbia during a reactor meltdown crisis, I was ordered to let 3 critically injured sailors die to preserve reactor integrity. I disobeyed that order, saved all 3 men, and still prevented the meltdown using procedures I developed under combat conditions. Connors leaned forward. You're saying a superior officer ordered you to let men die? I'm saying that outdated protocols valued equipment over lives. That's what I'm fighting to change. The interview continued for 20 minutes, Elena laying out the full story. The Columbia incident, her forced retirement and identity change, Kovac's sacrifice on the Nevada, the ongoing investigation into sabotage and cover-up. When it was over, Park approached with his tablet showing real-time social media metrics. Commander, you just became the most talked-about person on the internet. The hashtag #SaveLivesFirst is trending worldwide, and we're receiving reports that 3 senators have called for immediate hearings into submarine medical protocols. Good, Elena said. Let's make sure those hearings actually change something. But the real surprise came 20 minutes later, when Dr. Robert Chen appeared with Admiral Kovac, who was supposed to be in intensive care, but had apparently checked himself out against medical advice. Admiral, you should be in bed, Elena started. I should be dead, Kovac interrupted. But I'm not, because you're as brilliant as I remembered. And I just watched your interview, Commander. You did exactly what needed to be done. He handed her an official document. This is my formal recommendation that you be appointed Director of Submarine Medical Operations, with full authority to implement your protocols fleet-wide. It's also my resignation from active duty, effective immediately, to prevent Vice Admiral Hennessy from claiming I used my position to inappropriately influence medical policy. Sir, you can't resign. My career is over anyway, Elena. 600 millisieverts of radiation exposure tends to end naval careers pretty definitively. But before I go, I'm making sure the Navy can't hide what we accomplished. Can't hide what you've been developing for 6 years in civilian hospitals while they pretended you didn't exist. Elena looked at the document, at the man who'd sacrificed everything to force truth into daylight, and realized that some battles were won not with weapons, but with the courage to stand publicly for what was right. Admiral, she said quietly, when this is over, when the hearings are done and the protocols are implemented, and Hennessy faces whatever consequences he deserves, what happens to us? Kovac smiled weakly. We get to rest, Commander. We get to know that we changed something that mattered. And we get to watch the next generation of submarine medical officers save lives using procedures you developed. He swayed slightly, and Dr. Chen immediately moved to support him. Admiral, back to intensive care, now. That's a medical order you're going to follow. As they led Kovac away, Elena stood in the empty conference room, holding the document that represented both an ending and a beginning. Outside, media crews were still broadcasting, congressional staffers were scheduling hearings, and somewhere in San Diego, Carson Blackwell was watching his world collapse. But in this moment, Elena Rodriguez, not Martinez, not a ghost, but herself completely, felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 years. Peace. That peace lasted exactly 18 minutes before Commander Park burst into the conference room with news that shattered it completely. Commander Rodriguez, we have a situation. Mercy General Hospital just admitted Marcus Williams, the teenager you operated on this morning. He's crashing. Severe post-operative complications, and the surgical team can't figure out what's wrong. Elena was already moving toward the door. What kind of complications? Sudden onset hemorrhagic shock. They think he might have a missed injury from the initial trauma, but... Park hesitated. The attending surgeon is Dr. Philip Morrison. He's refusing to consult with you because he says your termination means you have no legal standing to provide medical advice on hospital cases. Philip Morrison is Carson Blackwell's protege, Elena said, the pieces clicking together. He was trained to follow protocol over patient assessment. Tell me Marcus's vital signs. Park pulled up the data on his tablet. Heart rate 140, blood pressure 70/40 and dropping. Hemoglobin down to 6 from 10 this morning. They've transfused 4 units with no improvement. Elena grabbed her jacket. He's bleeding internally from a source they're missing. Probably a delayed splenic injury that's now ruptured. I saw marginal irregularities on the spleen during this morning's surgery, but it was stable enough that I prioritized closing the chest wound. Commander? Chen appeared in the doorway. You can't just walk into Mercy General. You were terminated. Security will remove you. Then I'll operate in the parking lot if I have to. That kid survived a gunshot wound and my surgery. He's not dying because Philip Morrison is too arrogant to ask for help. The drive to Mercy General took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Elena used the time to review Marcus's chart remotely, her medical mind analyzing data while her emotions churned with guilt and rage. She'd saved his life once. She'd be damned if institutional politics killed him now. They arrived to find the hospital's main entrance blocked by news crews who'd gotten wind of Elena's return. Cameras swung toward her the moment she stepped from the Navy vehicle, reporters shouting questions over each other. Commander Rodriguez, are you here to save the patient Director Blackwell tried to prevent you from treating? Is it true that Mercy General's surgical team can't handle the complications? What do you say to critics who claim you're grandstanding for publicity? Elena ignored them all, moving through the crowd with Chen and Park flanking her like military escorts. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Staff members stopped mid-conversation to stare. Some looked relieved, others looked terrified. Patricia Chen met them at the elevator, her face pale. Dr. Rodriguez, thank God you're here. Marcus is in the OR, but Morrison refuses to admit he's in over his head. The boy's parents are threatening to sue, and the hospital administrator is having a breakdown because this is turning into a media nightmare. Where's Blackwell? In his office, packing. The board fired him 2 hours ago. Patricia's expression carried grim satisfaction. He's being escorted from the building by security as soon as he finishes clearing out his personal items. They reached the surgical floor to find chaos barely contained. Through the OR observation window, Elena could see Dr. Morrison working on Marcus with visible frustration, blood pooling faster than he could suction it. He's looking in the wrong place, Elena said immediately. He's focused on the chest wound, but the bleeding is abdominal. The spleen has ruptured. Elena pushed through the OR doors before anyone could stop her. Morrison looked up, his face flushing red with anger and embarrassment. You're not authorized to be in this operating room. Security! Security is dealing with the media circus outside, Elena said, moving to the scrub sink. And that boy is bleeding to death while you waste time protecting your ego. I'm scrubbing in whether you like it or not. I'll have you arrested for practicing medicine without privileges. I'm a naval officer, operating under emergency medical authority in a life-threatening situation involving a civilian I already treated. Try to arrest me and explain to Marcus Williams's parents why you let their son die to prove a point. Elena's voice carried the command authority of someone who'd made life and death decisions in submarine reactor compartments. Now step aside and let me save his life, or assist me properly. Choose fast. Morrison's hands were shaking as he stepped back from the table. What do you need? Retract the incision I made this morning. I need access to the upper left quadrant. The spleen was borderline this morning. I should have taken it then, but I prioritized the chest wound. My mistake, but I'm going to fix it now. As Elena scrubbed, a familiar voice came from the OR entrance. Dr. Rodriguez, I need to speak with you immediately. Carson Blackwell stood in the doorway, looking dramatically different from the imposing figure who'd fired her 12 hours ago. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his face showing the strain of a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. I'm slightly busy saving the life of the patient you tried to prevent me from treating this morning, Elena said, without looking up from her scrubbing. Whatever you need can wait." "It can't wait. I need—" Blackwell's voice cracked. "I need to apologize. Publicly, privately, however you want. Marcus Williams is alive because you broke protocol this morning. The Admiral is alive because you have skills I was too blind to recognize. And 17 other physicians lost their careers because I valued control over competence." Elena turned to face him fully, water dripping from her freshly scrubbed hands. "You think an apology fixes that? You think saying sorry undoes the damage you caused to people who dedicated their lives to medicine?" "No," Blackwell said quietly. "Nothing fixes that. But I need you to know that I understand what I did, what I've been doing for years. And I need—" He paused, struggling with words. "I need you to save that boy's life. Because if he dies, it's on me for creating an environment where physicians are afraid to challenge authority even when patients are dying." Elena held his gaze for a long moment, seeing something she hadn't expected. Genuine remorse from a man who'd spent years believing his own righteousness. "Then get out of my OR and let me work," she said finally. "We'll discuss your redemption arc later if Marcus survives." Blackwell nodded and disappeared. Elena entered the operating room, where Morrison had already exposed the surgical field. The spleen was indeed ruptured, bleeding steadily into the abdominal cavity. "Clamp," Elena said, and Morrison placed it in her hand with none of his earlier arrogance. They worked in tense silence, Elena's hands moving with the precision that had impressed everyone who'd ever watched her operate. 15 minutes later, the bleeding was controlled. 20 minutes after that, the spleen was removed and the cavity was clear. Marcus's vital signs began stabilizing immediately. "He's going to make it," Morrison said, his voice carrying wonder and shame in equal measure. "You saved him again." "We saved him," Elena corrected. "You're a good technical surgeon, Dr. Morrison. You just need to learn that medicine isn't about following the person with the most authority. It's about following the evidence and having the courage to ask for help when you're in over your head." Morrison nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry I refused to consult you. I was protecting yourself instead of your patient." "I know. Don't do it again." As they closed the incision, Patricia appeared in the OR doorway with urgent news. "Dr. Rodriguez, Marcus's parents are here. They want to speak with you immediately. And there's someone else. A representative from the Senate Armed Services Committee. They're requesting your presence at emergency hearings tomorrow morning." "Tell them I'll be there after I finish closing this incision and ensuring my patient is stable," Elena said. "The Senate can wait. Marcus can't." But the surprises weren't finished. As Elena removed her surgical gown 30 minutes later, Commander Chen appeared with news that changed everything again. "Admiral Kovac just coded. He's in the ICU at Naval Hospital. They're trying to resuscitate him now, but Dr. Chen says his radiation exposure is causing multiple organ failure. He's asking for you." Elena's hands went cold. "How long does he have?" "Minutes, maybe. The radiation damage is too extensive." "His kidneys are failing, his liver is shutting down, and his bone marrow isn't producing blood cells." Chen's voice was gentle. "Elena, he's dying. He wants to say goodbye." The drive back to Naval Hospital was a blur. Elena kept seeing Kovac's face, the way he'd smiled when she'd agreed to come back, the determination in his eyes when he'd entered that reactor compartment knowing the exposure might kill him. She reached his ICU room to find him surrounded by machines, his skin gray with illness, but his eyes still sharp and aware. "Commander," he whispered as she approached. "Did you save the Williams kid?" "Both times," Elena said, taking his hand. "He's going to be fine." "Good. That's good." Kovac coughed weakly. "I need to tell you something. The sabotage on the Nevada. Naval intelligence traced it to 3 engineering petty officers, but they were following orders from someone higher up. Vice Admiral Hennessy? Deeper than that. Admiral William Cross, Chief of Naval Operations. He was the one who ordered the Columbia classified, who forced your retirement, who's been protecting officers who made fatal decisions for 15 years. Kovac's grip tightened on Elena's hand. He's the one who authorized the Nevada sabotage to prove your procedures were dangerous, to discredit everything we accomplished on the Columbia. Elena felt rage building, white-hot and pure. The CNO himself? He sabotaged a submarine to protect his career? To protect the Navy's reputation. To prevent congressional investigations into decades of preventable deaths. To maintain the illusion that Naval Command decisions are infallible. Kovac's breathing was labored now. But you're going to stop him, Elena. Tomorrow's hearings, you're going to tell them everything. Cross, Hennessy, all of them. Burn it all down and rebuild it right. Sir, I can't fight the Chief of Naval Operations. He'll destroy me. He'll try. But you have evidence. The Columbia files, the Nevada investigation, 17 physicians who can testify about systematic suppression of medical innovation. And you have the one thing Cross can't fight. The truth, witnessed by millions of people. Kovac smiled weakly. You went on national television tonight and told the world what happened. Cross can't classify that. Can't hide it. Can't make you disappear like he did 6 years ago. Dr. Robert Chen entered the room, his expression grave. Admiral, your vitals are deteriorating rapidly. We can try aggressive intervention, but the success rate, given your radiation exposure, is 0. Kovac finished. I know, Robert. I've known since I entered that reactor compartment that I wasn't coming back from this. He looked at Elena. But I'm taking the old guard down with me, and I'm leaving the Navy in better hands. Sir, you're not dying. I won't let you— Commander, that's an order. Let me go. But promise me you'll finish this. Promise me those 9 sailors who died from preventable radiation injuries will be the last ones. Promise me the Columbia protocols become standard fleet-wide. Promise me Carson Blackwell isn't the only person who faces consequences for valuing protocol over lives. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. I promise, Admiral. All of it. Good. Kovac's eyes were closing. Now get out of here and go prepare for tomorrow. Those senators are going to try to intimidate you. Don't let them. You're Commander Elena Rodriguez, and you've done things they can't imagine. Make them understand that. He died 6 minutes later, surrounded by medical personnel who'd tried everything and accomplished nothing against radiation damage too severe to overcome. Elena stood at his bedside, feeling the weight of his sacrifice and the burden of his final orders. Commander Chen found her an hour later in a private conference room, staring at documents she wasn't really reading. The hearings start at 9 tomorrow morning. Naval Intelligence is providing evidence of the sabotage conspiracy. The Justice Department is preparing criminal charges against Admiral Cross and Vice Admiral Hennessy. And Elena. She paused. 17 former Mercy General physicians are testifying about Blackwell's pattern of retaliatory terminations. This is going to be the biggest military medical scandal in decades. Good, Elena said, her voice hard. Let it be. Let every person who chose careers over lives, protocol over patients, face exactly what they deserve. The Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room was packed when Elena arrived the next morning. Senators, military officials, media representatives, and in the gallery, faces she recognized. Patricia Chen, Lieutenant Morrison from the Nevada, the Williams family, and a frail-looking Carson Blackwell, who'd apparently decided to attend his own public accountability. Senator Margaret Wallace, chair of the committee, called the hearing to order.
Commander Rodriguez, you've been called to testify about alleged misconduct by senior naval officers related to submarine medical protocols. Before we begin, I want to confirm that you're aware you'll be testifying under oath and that your statements carry significant legal implications.
I understand, Senator. I'm ready to tell the truth about everything.
Then let's begin. In your own words, please describe what happened aboard the USS Columbia in 2019.
Elena took a breath and began.
She told them about the reactor meltdown, about the 3 sailors with critical injuries, about the direct order to let them die. She told them about developing procedures on the fly, about saving all 3 men while simultaneously preventing nuclear catastrophe, about being forced into retirement to keep the incident classified.
She told them about 6 years of hiding, about building a civilian career while her military service was erased. She told them about Admiral Kovac's sacrifice on the Nevada, about his determination to force the truth into daylight, even at the cost of his own life. And then she told them about Admiral Cross.
The Chief of Naval Operations authorized sabotage of a submarine to discredit life-saving medical procedures,
Elena said, her voice steady despite the gasps from the gallery.
He did this to prevent congressional oversight of decisions that resulted in at least 9 preventable deaths over 15 years. He did this to protect officers who valued equipment over human lives. And he did this knowing that if the sabotage had succeeded, dozens of sailors could have died in a nuclear disaster 40 miles from San Diego.
Senator Wallace leaned forward. Commander, those are extraordinary allegations. Do you have evidence to support them?
Naval intelligence does, Senator.
They've traced the sabotage authorization chain directly to Admiral Cross's office. 3 engineering petty officers have already given sworn statements confirming they acted on orders from Cross's staff, and I have testimony from Admiral James Kovac, recorded before his death yesterday, confirming Cross's direct involvement in the Columbia classification and my forced retirement. The hearing room erupted. Reporters typing frantically, senators conferring with aides, military officials looking stunned. Senator Wallace gavelled for order. "We'll be calling Admiral Cross to testify under oath," she announced. "This committee takes allegations of criminal conspiracy extremely seriously, particularly when they involve the senior leadership of the United States Navy." The hearing continued for 6 hours. Elena answered every question with precision and honesty. Other witnesses testified: Captain Torres about the Nevada incident, Lieutenant Morrison about Elena's surgical capabilities, Dr. Robert Chen about Admiral Kovac's sacrifice and final statements. And then, unexpectedly, Carson Blackwell took the stand. "My name is Carson Blackwell, former director of Mercy General Hospital. I'm here to testify about a pattern of behavior that parallels what Commander Rodriguez has described in the Navy. For 5 years, I systematically terminated physicians who challenged my authority, who prioritized patient care over administrative protocol, who threatened my control." His voice shook. "I destroyed 17 medical careers because I valued being right over doing right. Commander Rodriguez was simply my most recent victim, and the one whose termination became public enough to expose my misconduct." Senator Wallace studied him carefully. "Mr. Blackwell, why are you testifying voluntarily against your own interests?" "Because Admiral Kovac died yesterday, proving that some things are more important than protecting your career. Because Marcus Williams almost died twice due to the culture of fear I created. And because if I don't face consequences for my actions, I'm no better than the admirals who hid the Columbia incident." Blackwell looked directly at Elena. "Commander Rodriguez,
I can't undo what I did. But I can make sure everyone understands that the problem isn't just military bureaucracy. It's anywhere leaders prioritize control over competence. She also announced that Congress would establish an independent review of military medical decision-making to prevent future suppression of life-saving innovations. Outside the hearing room, Elena was immediately surrounded by reporters, but Commander Chen cleared a path through them. They reached a quiet corridor where Patricia Chen was waiting with unexpected news. Dr. Rodriguez, Mercy General's Board of Directors has offered you the position of Chief of Emergency Medicine, full authority over trauma protocols, complete administrative independence, and a formal apology for your termination. I'll think about it, Elena said, but I have other commitments first. Those commitments took shape over the following weeks. The Navy officially appointed Elena as Director of Submarine Medical Operations with the rank of Captain. Admiral Cross resigned under pressure and faced criminal indictment for conspiracy and endangerment.
Vice Admiral Hennessy was relieved of command and forced into retirement. The Columbia Protocols were declassified and became required training for all submarine medical personnel. A memorial was established at Naval Hospital San Diego, honoring Admiral Kovac and the 9 sailors who'd died from preventable radiation injuries. And Carson Blackwell, surprisingly, became an advocate for medical reform, working with state boards to establish protections for physicians who reported administrative retaliation. 3 months after the hearings, Elena stood in Mercy General's new Emergency Trauma Center, funded by a combination of hospital resources and Navy grants, watching young physicians train on the protocols she'd developed. Patricia Chen worked beside her, now promoted to Director of Nursing. You know, Patricia said, when I met you 3 years ago, I thought you were just another talented doctor trying to survive in a difficult system. I had no idea you were a ghost trying to escape your own legend. I'm not a ghost anymore, Elena replied. Just a physician trying to make sure Admiral Kovac's sacrifice meant something. Marcus Williams appeared in the emergency department entrance, now fully recovered and wearing a Navy ROTC uniform. He'd decided to pursue military medicine, inspired by the woman who'd saved his life twice and changed an entire institution in the process. Commander Rodriguez, he said, I wanted you to know that I've been accepted to the Naval Academy. I'm going to study emergency medicine. Because of you. Elena felt emotion tightening her throat. Marcus, you don't owe me. I don't owe you, ma'am. I'm choosing this because you showed me what medicine should be. Courage over protocol. Lives over careers. Truth over convenient lies. He smiled. That's what I want to practice. That evening, Elena returned to Naval Hospital, where a small ceremony was being held to formally dedicate the Admiral James Kovac Center for Submarine Medical Excellence. Dr. Robert Chen presented her with Kovac's final message, a letter he'd written before entering the Nevada's reactor compartment. Elena, the letter read, if you're reading this, it means my gamble worked. The truth is public, the protocols are validated, and you've stopped hiding from who you really are. Don't mourn my death. Celebrate what we accomplished. 9 sailors died unnecessarily because the Navy chose secrecy over safety. Make sure you're the last person who has to sacrifice everything to prove that lives matter more than institutional reputation. The fleet needs you. Medicine needs you. Be the bridge between military necessity and medical ethics. Be the voice that refuses to stay silent when silence costs lives. That's your mission now, Commander. Don't fail it. Elena stood at the memorial dedication, surrounded by submarine medical officers who had learned her protocols, by hospital staff who'd witnessed her courage, by the family of Marcus Williams, who'd seen her refuse to abandon a patient regardless of consequences. And she realized that Admiral Kovac had been right about everything. Some battles were won with scalpels instead of weapons. Some victories required sacrificing careers to save institutions. And some truths needed to be forced into daylight, even when darkness seemed safer. "Admiral," she said quietly to the memorial plaque bearing Kovac's name. "Mission accepted. I won't fail it." Because Elena Rodriguez had learned something fundamental during her journey from hidden ghost to public champion. That the most dangerous enemy wasn't nuclear radiation or institutional bureaucracy or even career-protecting admirals. It was silence. The silence of competent people who knew better, but said nothing. The silence of physicians who witnessed malpractice but feared retaliation. The silence of officers who saw preventable deaths but protected their careers. That silence had killed 9 sailors, destroyed 17 medical careers, and nearly claimed both Admiral Kovac and Marcus Williams. But silence ends when someone finds the courage to speak truth, regardless of consequences. And Elena Rodriguez, former ghost, current bridge builder, and permanently committed truth-teller, had just taught an entire institution that some voices refuse to be silenced, some truths demand to be heard, and some battles are worth fighting, even when victory requires sacrificing everything you thought you wanted, to become everything the world actually needs.